In this video, I'll be showing how to replace a rear axle on a Chevrolet Equinox. It is located behind the rear wheel. Let's get started. Now let's go ahead and remove our right rear wheel. There are 5 19mm lug nuts. And now let's take off our wheel. Now that our wheel's off, let's go ahead and make our way to the back side of the knuckle. Now locate our 2 caliper bracket bolts. There's one recessed in the knuckle here and one up here. They are both 18mm. During removal of the last bolt, keep a hand on the caliper bracket so it does not fall. Now I'm going to take a hanger, place it in the slide pin, remove the bracket and the caliper, and hang it on the trailing arm. Now for our T30 screw, I'll be using a T30 Torx bit. If this is stuck on, you could also use an impact driver. Now we can set it aside. Now we could go ahead and remove our rotor. If yours is stuck on, you could use a rubber mallet to break the seal. Now we're going to move along to our axle nut. I'll be using a 32mm socket and an impact wrench. Now I'm going to take a punch and hammer and hit along the axle in the center divot to make sure the axle shaft moves freely inside the wheel bearing and hub assembly. As you can see, our axle shaft is moving freely. Now we're going to move along to the back side of the knuckle again to locate our 3 18mm bolts holding our wheel bearing and hub assembly down. I'll be removing those. Now at this point you want to place a hand on the wheel bearing and hub assembly to ensure it does not fall out. I'm going to push in on the axle and push out on the wheel bearing and hub assembly. Remove the bearing, and there it is. Now I'm going to remove my backing plate as well. Now let's remove our wheel speed sensor. I'll be using a T30 Torx bit to remove the screw. I'm just going to pull the sensor up and set it aside. Now I'm also going to remove the plastic retainer clip on the thread of this bolt here. I'll be using a trim tool to remove this. As you can see, we have access to our upper control arm nut and bolt. They are both 18mm on both sides. We'll be putting a ratchet on the nut side and holding the bolt side with a wrench. Now I'm going to break it free. Now let's remove our bolt. Now I'm going to go ahead and locate my rear sway bar end link. There are 2 15mm on both sides. Again, I'll be using a ratchet on the nut side and a wrench on the bolt side. Now we can remove our bolt. Moving down to the lower point of the knuckle for the lower control arm bolt, there are 2 18mm on both sides. Now let's remove our bolt. Quick note for your suspension component nuts and bolts, keep in mind where they go. As you can see, they are different in length. Now let's remove our bolt. Now we're going to move along to the back side of the knuckle again to locate our 3 21mm bolts, connecting the trailing arm and the knuckle together. I'm going to be breaking all of these free first. Now let's go ahead and remove them. Now before we remove the last one, we are going to want to place a hand on the knuckle to ensure it does not fall down. Now let's go ahead and remove our knuckle. Now to remove our axle, we're going to follow along and locate the rear differential assembly and our rear axle. Now I've placed a collection receptacle under the rear differential just in case it leaks out any diff fluid. I'm going to use a pry bar to dislodge the axle from the differential. As you can see, it's dislodged. Now I'm going to slide the axle out. And there it is. Quick note before installation, you do have a snap ring on the end of the axle that sits fully inside the differential. You're going to want to make sure that fully seats in during install. Now I'm going to go ahead and slide the axle into the rear differential. Now to finish fully installing our axle, I'm going to be hitting the other side with a rubber mallet to ensure that snap ring fully locks in the differential. Now to install our knuckle. I'm going to slide the axle in place. And we're going to start off at our top mounting point. I'm going to slide our bolt in our bushing. And hand thread out our nut. Now we're going to move on to the lower control arm. I'm going to slide our bolt in. Now I'm going to hand thread on our nut. Now for our rear forward lower control arm mounting bolt. I'm going to use a socket to gain more leverage to align the holes. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand thread on my nut. Now for our sway bar end link bolt and nut. Now to install our trailing arm to our knuckle. As you can see, our holes do not align, so I'll be using a screwdriver to align them. Stick it in and pry them together. Now I'm going to take my bolts and thread them in. Again, I'll be using a socket to gain more leverage to ensure it goes in straight. Now I'm going to go ahead and snug these up. The torque specification for these is 118 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and snug down these three 18mm bolts and nuts on the suspension. Now let's go ahead and torque all three to 74 foot-pounds. Now let's go ahead and snug down both 15s on our sway bar end link. Now let's go ahead and torque this down to 43 foot-pounds. Now for our wheel speed sensor. I'm going to go ahead and feed it through the knuckle. And for the retainer, I'm going to press down on our upper control arm bolt, ensuring it's fully flush. I'm going to slide the sensor in the knuckle. I'm going to hand thread on our T30 screw for the sensor. I'm going to snug it down using a T30 Torx bit. Now we're going to go ahead and torque this to 53 inch-pounds. Now let's go ahead and prep our mating surface. I'll be using some brake cleaner and a wire brush. I have a collection receptacle underneath the vehicle for all the brake clean. Now I'm going to go ahead and wipe everything down with a clean rag. For anything really caked on, you could use a razor blade. Now I'm going to clean everything up with some brake cleaner and a clean rag. Now to lubricate my axle, I'm going to apply some lubricant on the axle splines. I'll also lubricate along the hub to knuckle mating surface. Now I'll be cleaning the face of the knuckle with a wire brush. And I'll pass with a rag with some brake cleaner applied to it. Now with our mating surfaces prepped, I'm going to go ahead and install the backing plate, wheel bearing, and hub assembly. I'm going to slide the backing plate over first. The cutout is for the brake caliper and bracket. Now I'm going to slide my wheel bearing and hub assembly over and push in. Quick note, if the backing plate shifts, that's okay. We are going to realign it upon installation of the wheel bearing and hub bolts. Now let's go ahead and reinstall our three 18mm wheel bearing and hub bolts. Now that their hands threaded on, I'm going to go ahead and snug them down. Now I'm going to go ahead and torque all three bolts down to 74 foot-pounds. Now let's go ahead and clean our wheel hub. I'll be using some brake clean and a wire brush. Now I'm going to go ahead and wipe it down with a rag. Now let's go ahead and prep our wheel hub to brake rotor mating surface. I'll be using some anti-seize. Now let's go ahead and install our brake rotor. I'm going to slide it into place, make sure the set screw hole aligns with the holes on the rotor. Now I'm going to hand thread on my set screw. Now I'm going to snug it down with my T30 Torx bit. Now let's go ahead and install our brake caliper and brake caliper bracket. I'm going to remove the hanger. Now I'm going to slide it over the rotor. Now we're going to move along to the back side of the knuckle again for my two 18mm caliper bracket bolts. Now let's go ahead and snug these down. Now let's go ahead and torque these two bolts to 74 foot-pounds. Now to install our 32mm axle nut. I'm going to hand thread it on first. Then snug it down with my impact gun. Now that our nut is snug, I'm going to take a pry bar, put it in between the two studs, and lock the axle. This is so I could torque the nut down to 185 foot-pounds. Now remove your pry bar. Quick note, if your differential did leak out some fluid, follow manufacturer guidelines on how to refill it. Let's go ahead and reinstall our right rear wheel. Now thread on your 5 19mm lug nuts by hand. Now I'm going to snug these down in a crisscross pattern. Now let's go ahead and torque these to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. And that completes our install. Now take the vehicle for a road test, and thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.